So, welcome back. We're up to the 53rd World Communications Day with Pope Francis. It was in 2019. I just got finished making the video where I read his texts and I literally screwed it all up, but I did my best. I'm reading them live. It's the only way I'm going to get through it. If I try to be perfect, I won't do it. So I'm just reading them live. You'll know it's human because of the way I mispronounce words and all of that. But anyway, I want to do it and I want to put it out there. And I'm trying really hard to let perfectionism just go out the window with all of these videos. So I appreciate you putting up with all of that. But on the 53rd World Day of Communication, the first thing I pulled out was how he's talking about the importance of being in relation, not isolated. I've studied at Divine Mercy University. I studied psychology, and it was very much a positive psychology focused program. And one of the things they talk about in positive psychology, which is the study of what leads to well-being versus the study of what leads to abnormal psychology, it's the study of what leads to well-being. And they talk about that one of the things that definitely helps us is relationships, because human beings are relational beings. We were created to be in relationship. And so Pope Francis is just starting off this conversation about communication by saying that communication is all about building relationships, and we humans are supposed to need to be in relationships, because when we get too isolated, that's when bad things begin to happen to us. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have time alone. I need time alone. You need time alone. But when we just get really ultra isolated, and I know there's situations where people can't help it, but and I'm the world's worst, my friends have to pull me out all the time, but to just be alone too much is not a good thing, is what he's saying. And so he uses the metaphor of the net to describe the internet, which is sometimes called the net, sometimes called the web. A lot of these terms seem like they're getting outdated, but this was 2019, so not too long ago. But the net, when you think about that metaphor, I was thinking about the fishermen putting the nets in the water, and Jesus causes them to get full of fish, and we know that story. That so you could say this is an evangelization tool to throw the net out, be catchers of men, and all of that. Pope Francis is going to say that it can be positive and it can be negative. It just depends. The conscious and targeted distortion of facts. One of the negative things that happens on the internet is that there are people, some people might call them bad actors, who want to take advantage of us. And I'm not going to pretend I've not studied the criminal mind or anything, but we assume that whatever happened in their lives created a situation where they felt justified, or they felt like was the only option they had, or they got trapped into something that they can't get out of. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons that this could happen, but there are people that are trying to scam us every day on the internet, trying to get our information, trying to steal from us. We know that. But then there is a level of this that I think we actually think is okay, So the conscious and targeted distortion of facts in politics is approved? It's legal because political speech is not regulated like consumer speech is. If I lie to you about a product, they can tell me to stop doing that. If I lie to you about a politician, they really can't tell me to stop doing that. I think that's one of the major problems that we have in the United States of America. But there definitely is a conscious and targeted distortion of facts sometimes on the internet. But Pope Francis says these social networks can be positive. They can help us connect with one another, rediscover one another, and assist one another. He's kind of saying, I, I, I doubt that he was that involved personally in the social networks. I don't know that for sure, but for the rest of us, we got on Facebook and we connected with old friends or old family members we hadn't seen in a while. And so we were able to rediscover people and relationships in our lives. We connect with people that we work with and we know things about them we wouldn't otherwise know. I find myself sometimes in conversations going, "Oh, how was your trip to Vietnam or whatever?" And then having to explain that I had seen it, I had seen their pictures on Instagram or something, feeling a little ashamed almost that I was voyeuring in on their lives, but they had posted it, and that's just the way that we live. And he mentions also this that we can assist one another. We're able to say, "Hey, this is happening in my life. Would you pray for my family?" or whatever. I mean, that version of it. There's also been lots of stories where we became known of bad things happening around the globe because somebody was able to post about it on these social networks, and we're able to get help then from that. And definitely these are the very positive things that have come from not just the internet but social networks. What was it, Facebook was first available I think in 2004. And so, not that 20 some odd years we've had it, and has it not totally changed our lives in so many ways? The negative things that can happen, it the okay, the internet itself was used in the political realms. I think Obama was one of the first ones to really start using it. But we know Donald Trump really used social networks to get elected. And um, we had a stage in there where the social networks were realizing there were a lot of misinformation going out there, manipulating for political and economic advantages without respect for the person on the other end. And for a while, social networks were trying to regulate it. We know that they don't do that anymore. As I was reading, I don't remember if it was this one or the one before, where Pope Francis says, aren't we lucky that they're trying to regulate themselves, and we're not that lucky anymore. It's not happening. And some people think that's great, because it's free speech. But yeah, so much to digest about the different attitudes about all of this. But I'm just going to say, if you're using social networks to manipulate for whatever purpose, it's not okay. It's not okay. And you're not building relationships, you're tearing them down. And we've all been guilty of sharing misinformation. Maybe we didn't do it on purpose, and maybe we're not very good at even reading the article before we share it. I'm sometimes really bad about that myself. Too quick to trust some source just because it's that source, and not realizing that the humans that work for these organizations may not always be accurate and may not be doing that on purpose either, so it's a lot, and we are responsible, each one of us. He mentions the statistic that 1 in 4 young people is involved in cyberbullying. It wasn't clear if they were being bullied or doing the bullying or both. But yeah, and we know the damage that this has done, and people who have lost their lives over this. I have my students watch a video by Monica Lewinsky because she was the first person to really get torn down by the internet, according to her anyway. We know the damage it can do, even if we feel like somebody shouldn't have done what they did. Did they really deserve to have everybody know their personal stuff? And in the political realm, I guess it was okay. And sometimes we know more than we need to. But she's talked about the bullying that she received and how almost didn't live through it. And if she hadn't had her friends and family with her, she wouldn't have. And it's just scary. And sometimes young people or older people are getting bullied by something that's not even real. It could be some sort of bot out there trolling us. It's not even a real person. Now, they've been programmed by a real person to do, I guess, evil things, but the seriousness of this, that the relationships can be built and they can be torn down. He said the net, I made a little graphic of the net there, works because all its elements share responsibility. And I teach this stuff, and I hadn't even really thought about the fact that the internet doesn't have a hierarchy till he brought it up. I mean, we take things for granted and we think we don't need to explain them or whatever, but he's absolutely right. There is no particular, it was created by Tim Berners-Lee, the World Wide Web, the ability to have websites and web pages and HTML code and web browsers and all of that. And nobody really owns it. Now, we know it is controlled, but it's not controlled by one particular person. So there's some centers of power that control the algorithms, and now with AI, it's getting even more murky, but kind of just depends. Are you on Google? Are you in that family? Well, that's being controlled by these people. Are you on Facebook and Instagram? Are you being, a part of that meta world at this moment? They're controlling that. Are you on X, Blue Sky, YouTube as a part of the Google family? Are you on a Microsoft universe with Bing? Do they still have Bing? I only use Google, so I don't know. So there's these few centers of power that do control things, but individuals can get on there and have websites and make videos and post things, and you may never see it if the algorithm doesn't let you, but there's just a lot of people on the internet, and we are all sharing this responsibility. And I think that's true. What he's saying is true. A community is strong if it is cohesive, supportive, built on trust, with common objectives, where people listen and dialogue. Those are and he's not just saying that about the internet. He's saying about communities in general are strong when they have these things, when they're supportive instead of tearing each other down, when trust has been built instead of destroyed, and trust is built on doing what you say you're going to do and telling the truth, being honest, being transparent and authentic, and all those things that build trust. Trust is the only way we get rid of fear, if we trust one another within this community. And one of the best ways to do that is to have a common objective. It's hard sometimes because everybody has a different opinion about what's good for the organization. But at least let's have the common objective that we're not going to tear down the organization. Let's have a common objective that we want to build up the organization and for the organization to thrive and be a really wonderful, flourishing place to be, That's not always the case, though. There are people who you can tell by their words and their actions that they're not trying to build up, they're trying to tear down. And that has to be questioned, right? Doesn't it? Because you don't have that common objective. And everybody has a different opinion about what that means. If you are in a community like of where people live, and you're trying to help that community be fire-wise, out in the West, you want the community to be fire-wise. That's a safety thing. And so you're trying to help the community based on that, but then you have another group of people who bought into that community because of the beauty of the evergreens and the shrubs and the bushes and the trees and all of that, and they don't want that to go away. And they think the beautification of the community is what is important. You can disagree, but if as long as both groups really do want what's best for the community, then you can kind of find some sort of compromise where at least the most dangerous shrubs could be removed, and while the pine trees remain, or what, you can come to some sort of conclusion that helps, because both groups are correct in their assessment, but because they're both correct, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. And the only way you can get through that is through listening and dialogue. He's absolutely correct about that. But he also says, Pope Francis says, that social networks are not necessarily synonymous with community. If they're not doing those things on that list, then it might not be a community just because it connects people. And often, groups with similar concerns are connected, but they actually have weak bonds. I've got a typo in there and I can't figure out what it was supposed to say. But we know that's true, that people bond over the weirdest things on a very shallow level. They don't really know each other. They just have these weak bonds because they agree about one particular political issue or whatever. And they've been vocal about it and they've connected somehow. And I mean, maybe you really know these people from life and maybe you don't. I've had situations where in the early days that I was friends with people I didn't really know, and it didn't really work out because I didn't really know them. Define by what divides us, not what unites us. We're often defined on social media by what divides us, not what unites us. Well, some groups of people are defined by what unites them by how they've divided themselves from other groups. And it baffles me right now how I can feel so confused by what other people believe. And then I see their post on Facebook where they're talking about being so confused about what people like me believe. And how could two groups of people be so confused about each other? Well, that's because we're not listening and we're not having dialogue. We are barricaded, as Pope Francis has said before, in our extreme little worlds with our extreme sources of news. And, like somebody else might be believing their political figures, and I might be believing my political figures. And that group doesn't believe my political figures, and I absolutely don't believe their political figure, so it comes down to how can they believe them? And then they're saying, how can you believe them? I don't know the answer to this, but it is a big current problem. The net ought to be a window on the world, but becomes a showcase of narcissism. Not just personal narcissism, but group narcissism. I saw an article today about the levels of group narcissism. What does it mean? Well, there are clinical terms about narcissism. We're not going to get into that. But I think what Pope Francis is saying here is that when we really only care about ourselves, and what does narcissism usually mean? Somebody who needs a lot of attention. No matter what you say, they only bring it back to how it relates to them. And they blame a lot. They cast blame a lot. They take absolutely no responsibility for anything. And so, this is the world we live in. We've got groups of narcissistic people, and I'm including myself in this, who are doing nothing but only thinking about themselves, and how it relates to them and what it means to them. And what I've been reading recently with Richard Rohr and with Pope Francis is that now we've talked about there being autonomous complexes where you don't have control over it. It's compulsive. And until you heal that, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing I can do about it until we heal our complexes. We're just having these reactive stuff and we feel justified. We don't realize we're out of control. We don't realize we've been triggered or that somebody's punched our button and we've had this knee-jerk reaction. We don't really think about not being in control, but we're not, and so until we heal, there's not really much we can do under those situations. But I've lost my train of thought. I had something really important I was going to say about that. Anyway, so back to narcissism. Oh, the conversion thing. Sure. So the thing I've been reading a lot about is that people like Richard Rohr, people like Pope Francis, really thought that if you weren't in a state in your life where you could be compassionate and care for others the way Jesus did, that you really weren't converted. Now, you could think you're converted, but you've not been converted of heart because you're not acting like Jesus. You're not doing, well, none of us can be Jesus, but to not even try to be of service to people, to the marginalized. And that's a lack of conversion of heart. And, they talk about by the fruits you shall know them. Is the Holy Spirit inside of me? Well, we have a whole list of fruits that we can, like a checklist, that we can be checking off to find out if the Holy Spirit is inside of me and you, vice versa. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that some of us are narcissistic because of our upbringing and our conditioning and our wounds. And until we heal them, probably not going to change. But if we do truly want to have an actual conversion of heart to the heart of Christ, then it's going to take healing those wounds so that we aren't just only thinking of ourselves, but we can be of service to others and see all humans in the likeness of God, because that's what you will do under those circumstances. The web can entrap us and isolate us. And so that idea of the net, I mean, you can still breathe because it's a net, but you're trapped. You can't get out because there's just too many things holding you back. Same with a web, a cobweb, a spider web. We're just trapped in it and it can isolate us. And so the very thing that can connect us and make us feel relational is also the very thing that can mess with our mind and make us feel very isolated. And I think, going through the pandemic was rough on young people, and I see them, I think I've mentioned it before, that when they're in class together, sitting in a team and having fun, and they may not even be working on their project, but I don't really care because they're talking to each other and they're engaged and they are enjoying the relationship. And I think that's just as important of a life skill to learn as anything else. Young people have the illusion that the social web, that's what Pope Francis called it, can satisfy on a relational level. They think that that's all they need is what they see on TikTok or whatever. I saw an article today a friend shared with me that said that Gen Z is getting a little bit away from the perfect things that they've been told they need to show on Instagram and more into the imperfect real life stuff they feel comfortable to show on TikTok. And then there was there's this platform called Be Real, I think, where it shows you and it also shows what's on the other side of your camera or something. I never did understand that. I have a friend that uses that a lot. But that none of that. I don't even think the reality-based tragic stuff that we're sharing, none of that is going to really give us the same sensation of being at a table, as Pope Francis has said, with our friends, with our phones put away, and actually communing with one another, talking. He was talking about the looking in their eyes and hearing the breath, and their being in that same physical location with somebody, having a conversation, having dialogue, listening to each other is just so what we need, and we're not getting that through the social web. And so we become social hermits, alienated from society. We think we're connected, but we're not really. And again, we need a lot of alone time. We hear God in our alone time, in our quiet time. But we need people as well. And so I appreciate all of those things. And during the pandemic, I had family members playing video games with people all over the world or whatever, and they needed that. That was the only thing they had, and they like really hung on to it because it was important to them. But got a little weird after a long time and felt like when they were face to face with somebody, there was a disconnect. So hopefully we're coming out of that, but we were all in that together. We want the web to remain free and open, but we must promote its positive use. Yes, we don't like the idea of anybody controlling it, and I don't think that is a good idea, although we have to admit that there are just a few people who probably do control it to some level. But we want it to be free, but we need to promote its positive uses, not its negative uses. And I think we can only do that individually. I have absolutely no control over what Google does or Meta or Alphabet or any of those large companies. I have no control over them. I can only control myself, and I can attempt to share positive things instead of negative things. And I have been talking about this because of this project for a very long time now, and I can't tell that I'm any better at sharing positive things. Shame on me. But I do think that is the answer. I mean, I think Pope Francis is absolutely right that we need to be conscious of what we share. Sometimes we feel like we need to share something just so everybody knows about it, but then we become part of the problem as well. Multiplying connections, typo, does not increase mutual understanding. And so it doesn't mean how many people I connect with on LinkedIn. Maybe it's thousands. That doesn't create understanding. That creates a lot of connections, but not necessarily a lot of understanding, because I'm probably only going to see a few of those people anyway. So let's just not confuse that, he says. We are all members of one body, another metaphor he was using, with a duty to speak the truth. He was basically saying, to my understanding, that we are one body with Christ being the head of the body. And the only way to really be a part of that body is to speak the truth. And so if we were to think about our own body and how my big toe needs to talk to my thumb or whatever, my left foot needs to be telling the truth to my right foot, or I'm going to fall down. There's going to be a breakdown in communication and it's not going to work. I think that's what he's saying. For us to be one body that's a flourishing body, then every parts, all of our individual parts need to be communicating effectively and truthfully with each other. And so this metaphor works really well with what we're talking about. Lies are a selfish refusal to recognize we are members of one body. So we are, he's saying, members of this one body, whether we know it or not. And if we're lying to each other, then it means that we are selfishly not recognizing that we are members of this one body. And therefore, we are causing the body to be ill. We're causing the metaphorical cancer that's destroying the body, or we're causing the metaphorical accidents caused by a body not communicating with all of its parts accurately. Makes total sense. When Christ is the head of the body, others are not enemies or competitors. And so we are a part of this body. Maybe we're not listening to the head. But if we were listening to the head of this body, which is Christ, then we would be hearing that that we love each other. We would not be hearing that you're my enemy, or I'm your enemy, or you're my rival, or I'm competing with you for resources. By hopefully, my stomach doesn't say it's competing for resources against the heart. They all are using the same resources in a equitable way for the body to function. And so I do think that when we're looking through the eyes of Christ, then we are seeing people with love, not the other way around. God is not solitude, but communion and love. God created us. God is the Trinity. God itself, however you want to refer to it, is not alone, is not isolated. God is omnipresent and omnipotent. And so God is not solitude, but communion. And again, Pope Francis says these things and they seem so simple, but it's like my mind is like, what? Well, sure, but what? It's kind of like, I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say that before, but that makes total sense. And of course it's true. God is love. And for God to be love, God has to be sharing that love. And so God is not isolated. It's not sitting there in solitude. God is in communion with us. Now, we're not always in communion with God, but God is always in communion with us. The door is open. The door of his office is open. We just need to knock. Love always communicates. So to encounter the other, to be able to encounter the other, we do this through communication, and love always communicates. Even if love is communicating through actions, if you're doing something that is loving, like maybe you're cleaning the toilet for your family, that's a loving act, that actions are also a form of communication. If you're mowing the lawn, you're communicating love to the people that live in the house with you, if people live in the house with you. And so communication's not always verbal, but love always communicates. Love is in relation. Love is something that we don't understand. We never will, but we hope we experience it. And I think when we think of everybody who's been created through the years as little sparks of God, then they only, you need to love others as you love yourself. So you need to have a healthy self-love to take care of yourself properly before you can love another, or it becomes codependent. So you need a healthy love for self and a healthy love for other. And that's the way we experience God often. Sometimes it's in solitude, but more than often it's with the way we experience other people, the love that we share, the communion and communication we share with others. We are all made in the likeness of God. We carry the longing for communion in our hearts. God is communion. God is love. And so we carry that longing in our hearts, and it will only be satisfied through that actual relationship and relation to each other. It's not going away. We are called to invest in relationships. And he says, including the ones that are online. And so we don't always think of that. I underlined it because we don't always think of our relationships as investments. Some people do in a transactional sense, and I don't think that's what Pope Francis is talking about here. He's just saying we're humans. Um, we are built for relationships, and we are called to invest in these relationships, these healthy relationships that build community, and even called to do this online because that's where people are. And I'm not saying if you've decided that you don't want to be online that you have to be, although if you're watching this video, you may be online a little bit. And I know that there are unhealthy amounts of being online, but I just think he's saying we're called to be in relationship. And right now that means also having that relationship with people online. Faith is a relationship, he says, an encounter. Now, again, this is one of those things. What? Faith is a relationship. We have faith in each other. That's a very relational thing. Now, people can destroy that faith. We have faith in God, and that's relational. Yeah, and I think the main thing is it kind of takes two to tango. You know, I can have faith in myself, I guess, but even that's relational to a certain degree in a weird sort of way, relating to my inner self or something, my higher self. But yeah, faith is a relationship. It is an encounter with God. We have faith in God. The Trinity, in order to be myself, I need others. He was talking about that, we are in the likeness of God, and God is the Trinity. I will not try to explain that because I don't understand it that much myself, but the masculine descriptors that we've given it is Father, Son, and then Holy Spirit. That was just probably human descriptors put on this idea of Trinity. And I had a book when I was young that said, okay, it's God's like an apple. You know, there's a core and there's the flesh and there's the skin. 3 in 1. That was a really simplistic way to try to explain it to a child, but I don't know that it was super, super duper helpful. But I think that we're in the likeness of God and God is in this relationship. And therefore, in order for me to be myself, I need other people. Am I really myself if I'm not with somebody else? I don't know. It's kind of like the tree falls in the forest. Does it make a sound if nobody's there to hear it? I don't know. We need to be mirrored. I mean, we know in psychology for children, babies, for them to have healthy attachment, healthy relationships, they need their parents, their mother, their father, their elders or their caretakers to mirror them in an honest way. You know, they kind of learn about themselves through the eyes of their caretakers. And we know that can, when it's really unhealthy and negative, can create really horrible situations, but for the majority, we hope and pray, infants and babies are, smiled at and cooed at and goo-gooed at and all of that until they develop a healthy sense of who they are. And then we spend how many years trying to get rid of that thing that got put on us, perhaps. But it's just the whole concept of mirroring that I think that this is talking about. From an individual with rivals to a person with traveling companions. Pope Francis is saying that this whole idea of being a part of the body with Christ the head, where we see everyone, all persons, through the eyes of love, then we see them as traveling companions. But if we're not converted enough of heart to do that, then we may see everybody as rivals. If you grew up in a household where food was slim pickings and you had lots of brothers and sisters or something, then you felt like every sibling was a rival for survival, basically. And I get that, and it's hard to shake that, even when things change. But there are others. You think about Maximilian Kolbe giving his life for somebody else. Not everybody could do that. He did, but not everybody can. But I'm not seeing these people in the concentration camp as my rivals. I see them as my companions, and I'm willing to give my life for their survival. That's a completely different. You can see why that seems like a true conversion of heart, right? To give your life for somebody else. Frankl talks about that, and giving meaning is about helping others. That's what gives your life meaning, and giving your life meaning is what will help you survive, or in some cases might help others survive. The network is a resource for communion if we encounter the body, heart, eyes, gaze, breath of the other. Can be, that it can be the exact opposite of that. In fact, a whole lot of what I see posted doesn't have anything to do with anybody's heart, unfortunately. But it can, and sometimes does, and that makes the network, the internet, a resource if it is an encounter like that. It is a resource if we share stories and pray together, if we share about our struggles and the good and the bad, and we're able to pray together. Then it becomes a resource instead of destructive. A network not to entrap, but to liberate and protect people. It can be, and often is. It can be a situation, and it might now we throw apps in it. It's not just social networks and not just the internet, but apps fall into this as well. That they're sometimes during wildfires. Somebody created an app to tell you where it was safe to go and all of that. So that's an example of the network being a way to protect people, to liberate people from the wildfires, not to entrap them. Can you imagine there being another app where instead of telling people where it's safe to go, it actually lures them into the middle of the fire so that they're killed? That's what we're talking about here. The net can be used to entrap, can be used to harm, sometimes just for financial criminal gain, sometimes for actual physical harm, or the network can be used to liberate and protect. And I can tell you which one Jesus is. And I think you can tell me too. Unity is not based on likes, but on the truth. He mentions there towards the end that in a church family, it's not about getting the most likes, it's about hearing the most amens, to the speaking of the truth is where the unity comes from. In fact, I remember seeing an advertisement that was showing children in danger of floods or something, and how people thought they were helping just by liking it, liking the post. That really wasn't helping, that people needed to actually give physical help, donations or volunteerism or whatever was the real help, not the I kind of make myself feel better just by clicking that button with the thumbs up there, which is actually offensive in some countries, by the way. I don't know how Facebook got away with that, but unity not based on likes, but on the truth. And I do think, and we don't always have to be in unison. We can be in harmony, but even so, many notes that harmonize instead of just singing the one note. And so unity, you could say that a choir is united. They're all in the choir, but they're not all singing the same note, but they're all singing notes that are pleasing, that go together in a way. Uh, but that unity is definitely based on truth. And you're not, I mean, one of the easiest ways to break apart a group or a relationship is to start lying to each other. And I can't wrap my brain around why some people are okay about being lied to. But if you think about a dysfunctional relationship, somebody might stay in a abusive relationship because they think their survival is connected to that relationship through finances or protection or whatever. Might be willing to put up with the lies because they also get fed, or whatever that is. But ultimately, I don't think you can have a healthy relationship without truth. And I think that's what Pope Francis is saying. He's saying in our tiny couple relationships of friendships or whatever, to the larger small group relationships, to the even larger church relationship, to the even larger community relationship or country or global or whatever, that we're never going to be united without truth. And I think one of the things right now that I have been thinking about a lot is that a lot of people don't want to be united. They have no intention of being united. They just want to win, whatever that means to them. They don't want peace. A lot of people don't want peace. They want chaos because they want to escape something in their mind or whatever. And so to me, it all goes back to healing. And so we can never get to any of these wonderful things we're talking about here without some really deep healing of these wounds. And we can hopefully get that through God's grace, through prayer. I think a lot of these things are not humanly possible, but if we pray for healing, then, I mean, Jesus was the healer, right? So we is the healer. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I think that's it for this, but thank you, and we've got a few more to go.